Hello, and welcome to my series, Ask an Angel, where we discuss topics related to the world of startups, entrepreneurship, and investing. I'm your host, Jonathan Hung, and today's episode, I'm joined by Tarek Waked. Tarek considers himself a builder and an optimist. He is the founder of Type 1 Ventures, a venture capital firm focused on progressing humanity towards a Type 1 civilization. They invest in space and deep tech companies. Thanks, Tarek, for doing this.
Appreciate you having me. A pleasure.
Yeah, let's dig into it. I always love talking to, general partners and like people who invest in VC in the same game as me. So let's talk about how you got investing into like VC investing. Like what made you get into this space?
It was definitely not a linear trajectory. I think so. I was a former founder. I went to school in Florida, and traditionally that school doesn't have a lot of venture capital exposure. And when I graduated, I started a tech company, ran that for about 5 years. And during my process at working in tech, I realized that the VC game is really relationship driven, and where you go to school, where your upbringing is, what your kind of network is, really impacts how well you can fundraise, how well you can speak the lingo. So I started scouting after I winded my company down. I started scouting for venture deals to build that network for the next time that I start a company. And one thing led to another. We encountered a lot of companies in space tech. This was around 2019 when we started the firm, and continued diving into space and loved it. Saw there was a really interesting opportunity and that we were at an interesting tipping point for the private space industry. And so one thing led to another. We led a couple deals and started Type 1. We started it. It was summer of 2019. Daniil Chen was with us from day one, and we were super happy to. It's an interesting path getting into venture, and then here we are.
Yeah, wonderful. So, you mentioned you're investing in space, as an industry. Why space? Like, why not traditional CPG or tech or, things in this planet?
Well, yes, agreed. One, all of that to me is a little boring compared to space. I've always wanted to go to space. I'll probably go to Mars one day. But ultimately, we're in a really interesting time where space is becoming privatized. And launch costs are coming down considerably. If you take the ISS, that was built by about 40 launches of the Atlas V rocket. The cost to launch per kilo of that rocket was $86,000 per kilo for the ISS. We're now, with obviously the advent of SpaceX and a lot of the other launch companies, driving that price down. The cost to launch on a Falcon 9 is less than $1,000. And that cost is going to drive even further down to below $100 with the advent of Starship and other super heavy launch vehicles. And so we started seeing that, and we also started seeing an indicator where when we were diligencing Orbit Fab, they build gas stations in space, but when we were diligencing them, the amount of satellites launched in all of human history was going to be eclipsed by the amount of satellites that was going to be launched in the next 5 years. And so when I see those data points, and also I loved like Stargate SG-1, like Teal'c and all those characters, I was like, this is a calling. And, it goes to show that if I don't have a career in NASA, I could still get involved in the space industry and do well. What's the next generation going to be able to do? So that's why we dove in. And the benefits of space to Earth are incredible. Everything we have today, from our cell phones to telephones, navigation, all of these things are due to space. And people think that, there's joy rides to space about like these billionaires going to space. Like that gets awareness out there. But the innovations from Silicon Valley came from the space age. And I think that's going to accelerate quality of life here on Earth moving forward. And that's why I'm so passionate about it.
No, great. Wonderful. So, I think this is something really important. Like, I'm an LP, I'm an LP in your fund, which is great. I'm really, because I love what you're doing. And I see space as definitely a huge industry to explore and get involved in now. Not like maybe 20 years ago, but right now. So I'm curious for my viewers and everyone out there, like, how do you usually find companies to invest in for the space industry? I mean, is there a particular type of pipeline you follow, or like, how do you find the best companies? in
Right.
this space.
And we're super happy to have you. You've been a believer in Type One since almost day one, and that takes a lot of guts to back an emerging manager in an industry like this. So, hats off to you. And our deal flow, really, I think our thesis is so focused. We're not geographically constrained, but we're thesis constrained.
Hmm.
Things have to
Yep.
progress humanity forward to a Type One civilization for us to want to invest in them. Um, and that means space and space adjacent. There's a lot of technologies we can develop here on Earth that'll help the future of space. And that a lot of times we'll talk to very like engineering focused and technical founders, and they've heard of the Kardashev scale, and
Hmm.
that just shows like our understanding of what they're building. A lot of these companies have longer time horizons or a bigger vision, and so one, I think the thesis is focused. If we talk to, say, a CPG company, we can't really add a lot of value there. But deal flow comes from continuous repetition. We do the way you operate in with one company, those companies founders talk to other founders. So that's one. And so referrals are really good, really interesting for us inbound. But when you look at an industry that's so niche, and you start seeing everything going on around the industry, you can kind of form internal theses within the industry. For example, launch costs coming down, Starship coming online. What are the companies that are going to take advantage of Starship's increased payload capacity? So last year we had an internal meeting, and I said, let's build a space station. And everyone looked at me like I'm an idiot. And they're like, how about we just go find a space station company to invest? And I'm like, that sounds good as well. And 11 months after, trying to find the best space station components provider or somebody taking advantage of Starship, we do outreach to those specific companies within that like sub thesis, and we find a company that we're comfortable with and then back them. At the early stage, where a lot of it is being a cheerleader and being a support to those founders besides the capital. So it's a combination of inbound, how you operate, and nowadays with the in-person events, like trying to be top of mind and being at those events. And then, yeah, I mean, one of our founders recently joined as an advisor as well. Shout out to Josh from SpaceForge. And so, yeah, that's how we primarily do it. There's no set formula.
Right. No, of course. So then, when you're looking at a founder, what's the most important quality? I mean, because it's not just about the company, really; it's really about the team.
Yeah. I mean, early stage, the only certainty there is there's uncertainty. And once you get comfortable with that, I've noticed that a lot of times, like if you private equity or regular investing, it's quantitative, it's data driven,
Yep.
and it's very
Hmm.
hard to make that transition to early stage where it's all these unknowns, all of these variables, and you have to focus
Hmm.
on founder, and so we're on a team. So I think the biggest thing is resilience, and
Hmm.
at least from my story, right? When I started the firm, it took us a long time to really build our niche, find our product market fit, find our people really to get around us. But once that was set and we had enough patience and resilience to get through that period of like figuring it out, things started to move forward because on a good foundation, you can grow quickly. And so having a founder that's patient and resilient and persistent is very important. And I also like them a little bit crazy. Like they need to be kind of like have a little tinge of craziness in them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of us like we like to talk about successes, but actually, like I kind of focus on our like failures and think like what I did wrong or what I did right from the wrong investment or the failure. It wasn't wrong at the time. It's just like they don't always turn out
Correct.
the best you want. Like what have you learned? Like what have you gone through from like losing? Because winning is easy, but like the losing part is where you really have to take lessons from.
100%. I've lost more than I can count. In building my own company, we scaled it to 100 people, then we had to shut down. Um,
Mm.
and so failure is the greatest teacher, and that holds very true
Hmm.
across any industry, across life in general. I think the biggest thing I learned was keeping. So when you make a success, don't pound your chest, and when you
Hmm.
when you fail, don't be hard on yourself. and just continuing that persistence. And it's like you can pull little tidbits of information from like these quotes that talk about it. For example, Winston Churchill said, um, "Success is going from failure to failure without a loss of enthusiasm." And just because it didn't work out doesn't mean the decision was wrong, because
Hmm.
you can make the right decision and all of the things could go against it, the macro environment. Does that mean that the next time you get encountered with that same decision, are you going to make it differently, or are you going to learn from that? What could you kind of do to make your decision have a better chance of success? Because it's all probabilities, right? You make a decision and then there's a bunch of probability trees going that in each direction. So you could make the wrong decision and still succeed, and but you'll never know because that feedback loop won't tell you that.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, when it comes to your portfolio companies, how many you try to have at any one given time? I know you obviously, of course, have partners and other associates on your team who help, but do you have a strategy when it comes to the portfolio management side?
Yes, I like to go really hands on. Sometimes my team
Mhm.
gets mad at me because I spend too much time with two companies.
Right.
There's an interesting rule of thumb. So it's your personal bandwidth as a human. You could probably handle 5 to 7 hands-on board relationships or board seats. So I try to focus with the companies when they get to like Series A. We did that with Space,
Right.
and I will
Mm.
take a weekly meeting with the founder after we made the investment, kind of help them think through. And just a lot of times, a founder needs somebody to bounce ideas off of, somebody that's on their team, not somebody that's overbearing and trying to control the company because they put some money in. We're actually team members there.
Right.
So my strategy to portfolio management is more so just being there. I'm not married. I don't have kids, so I'm available 24/7. And founders will call me at all hours of the morning. We recently opened up our UK office, so it's just like
Nice.
constantly being on is one strategy. Maybe it's not as sustainable, but that's kind of how we do it at the moment. And just we go visit our companies if they need something, whether it's branding or a connection or an introduction to somebody. We put ourselves out there, even if we're not getting paid for that specific service, because it's just part of the job.
Hmm. Okay. And like switching gears now, Tarek, like, everyone I think gets like, mystified by the investing side and you're talking to founders, which is great. But, there's another part of being a fund manager is like your relationship with your limited partners. Like, talk about that, describe that. Like, what's the cadence with them? Like, how do you feel that when you need to ask them for help? Because it's not just money when you get an LP. I think it's really like you have to be strategic who you take on, which is just looking at a dollar amount.
Correct. So we've been fortunate enough to build a really supportive LP base. I mean, our path was a micro fund that we started in 2021, and then we raised our second fund at the end
Hmm.
of 2021. And so we also do SPVs. So we have not only investors that are strictly into our SPVs for specific one-off deals, but we also have investors that are to our funds. I tend to look at my LPs like a personal relationship as friends. Like they'll text me, we'll
Hmm.
talk,
Hmm.
you and I are grabbing dinner tomorrow. And so if you keep it that way, and I mean, as you scale into a really big institution and you start dealing with like endowments and those types of institutions, that's not as sustainable, and you need um, some more controls in place, or not controls. I don't think that would be the word, but I treat my LPs as friends. Um,
Yep.
like the founders, I'm always on. We travel a lot. We're in the UK constantly. We're in Dubai. We're in LA and New York, just constantly traveling and visiting people, not because they gave us money or because they're LPs, but
Hmm.
because we truly just want to see them and see what's going on, how they're doing, and how we can help, as well as how they can help and support our mutual portfolio.
Yeah, it's so funny because I see that like the relationship between the LP and GP when like listen when times are tough, like hey, you kind of like try to stay clear, but then here's the funny thing, like I've seen it when the times are great, like when you already have a 10x on paper, then as a GP, like what do you do? Like those are things you have to have a good relationship rapport with your LP to figure out next steps. And take a like I'll give you a perfect example. I had a situation once where like, hey, one LP forced my cousin, who was a GP of a company, to exit out of Bitcoin. it was the funniest thing. We got lucky that we got in at Bitcoin at $300, and the company that we were going to invest in did not work out, but we put it into Bitcoin, and so we had money. When Bitcoin was at 2,000, 1,500, right? Hey, that's a 5x. That's great. But we didn't hold.
Oh man.
We didn't hold. Could you imagine? Even today, it's down like to 30,000. Like, whoops, from 300. Like, but it's that relationship. And LP's like, I need the money. And so it's like, well,
We had to
he
sell.
sold it out to everybody. So it's like, hey, maybe if I just took it in Bitcoin, it'd be better. So really, I think that dialogue is important.
Yeah, and I do.
Fun.
I also think it's important to understand that your founders can become LPs at the end of the day. So
Mm.
managing those relationships and helping, it's as a fund manager, you're just
Yeah,
like a bridge between two worlds, and you're trying to like help
yeah,
everybody succeed. If everybody around you succeeds, then you succeed. And
absolutely.
recently, we've also some of our founders that we've invested in, and as they start to succeed and do better, they get in a position where they can write smaller checks to
Hmm.
but maybe they can't meet their capital calls on time or something like that. We work with those founders as opposed
Yeah.
to harassing people. It's like, hey, it's a mutual it's a business built on relationships, and as soon as you understand that and you cultivate those
Absolutely.
relationships and understand everybody's individual needs, then I think that's kind of what's worked for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Just out of curiosity, like I love to hear your perspective on like any books, publications, or podcasts, or reading materials that you like that you tell your portfolio companies about or your LPs about. Like, how do you keep up to date with what's going on in the world or in your industry?
Personally, I'm on the phone a lot. So it's
Mm,
talking to my peers and understanding what
mm,
they're seeing and hearing it firsthand, as opposed to reading publications per se. What I do like is I have a certain couple of books for the space industry and deep tech industries that I've read, and I take a lot
mm,
of my thoughts from, or built my thesis around. One is The Case
yeah.
for Space by Robert Zubrin. The other
Mm,
one is The Case for Mars by Robert Zubrin. And so those two are kind of like the space Bible, in my opinion. And then there's
right.
another
Interesting.
sci-fi book if I want to start. There's like a sci-fi novel. It's kind of sci-fi based on real science. If I want to start thinking 10, 20, 30, 50 years out. And so that's our thesis.
Right.
Our thesis is thinking 50 or 100 years out, because a type 1 civilization you don't get there for 50 to 100 years, but
Right.
we do it in 10-year increments. So the other book is called We Are Legion, We Are Bob. It's a
Mm-hmm.
four-book series. I don't know why it's not been made into a Netflix series yet. So if anybody wants to read it and then let me know if they want to make it into a Netflix series, I'm game. It's called We Are Legion, We Are Bob, by Dennis something. Anyway, but yeah, so those are the three books that are kind of like my top for the space industry.
Oh, that's great. Well, now circling back on what you said before, you want to go to Mars, and you just talked about a book about Mars. So then, Elon Musk has this great quote about Mars. He's like, I like to die on Mars, just not on impact. Right? I think that's a great little quote. And so, when do you think people will be on Mars, but not just get to Mars, but like have some sort of like civilization and be able to just live?
Um, Speculation onto when there will be a civilization and when you can like go outside and breathe the air, like that's hundreds of years from
Yeah,
now until terraforming.
yeah.
But what I can talk to is my personal thoughts as to, after reading The Case for Mars, which a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the trajectory to get to Mars was taken from that. So Robert Zubrin put forth this theory of the Mars Direct mission, meaning
Mm-hmm.
or the way we
Yep.
thought we got to Mars was building massive spaceships in Earth's orbit, or going to the moon and building there and then going to Mars. But if you
Mm,
build, because a lot of the launch vehicle is actually just propellant. And so if you can get enough delta V, which is the change in acceleration, there's a certain amount of delta V you need to get out of Earth's atmosphere and get enough speed to go to Mars. And that's plausible every 2.2 years, where you can launch from Earth and land on Mars. So Starship
mm-hmm.
needs to come online. So the first thing you need to look for is Starship doing an orbital test, which hopefully happens this year. They need
Right.
to launch and land enough. They'll do that with Starlink. They need to launch and land enough starships where it's able to go to Mars. It's tested enough to go to Mars. The next launch window is 2025. So you have 2025, 2020, it's 2023, 2025, 2027, and
Mm,
2029. Before humans can go, you need to send a vehicle, an unmanned vehicle that'll bring enough stuff for people to live in, and also will be the return vehicle, the ERV, for the humans coming back. So let's say they can successfully launch an
Mm,
ERV in 2025, then by 2027 you could see humans going. If they don't meet the ERV by 2025, they would push that to 27. So I think by the end of the decade, you'll have at least an
mhm,
ERV going to Mars, if not actual humans landing by 2029. If
mm,
it's not 2029, it's 2031. Uh,
mm.
and every 2 years further, like the first few people will be very specialized roles, like a doctor that's also really good at engineering specific things in the hab units or something like that. They'll have to be multidisciplinary. But as you start getting enough people and enough of the bases set up around Mars,
Yeah,
then you'll be able to start sending people like me that don't really have that many expertises.
right.
But hopefully by the time 2040, 2045 comes around,
Hmm.
I'd have the opportunity to go. And if I ever died on Mars, I would just want a little tree to grow from, be buried in Mars, and have a tree grow from my bio, you know.
Yeah, there you go. Wow, great. Um, I'm curious one thing, Tarek, just to ask you about like, the current market conditions of where we are in the VC world. Like, obviously they talk about Web3, right? And like NFTs or crypto, whatever you want to call, yeah, that's part of Web3. That's not the only thing what Web3 is. I'm curious, where do you see that in your sector of space? Like, do you see a lot of Web3 come in to play right now, or is that just no industry? Space industry is just focused on space. How do we get up to Mars? How do we bring things into space? I mean, what do you see that? Because you're an investor, I'm sure you look at what's happening
Yeah, I mean,
now.
there's interesting uh, crossover. So
Hmm.
if you ever look at Web3, they always say they're going to the moon. Um, and but there's actually companies working with blockchain technology for the use of space. For example, there's a company called Copernic Space that's taking. We're not investors in Copernic, but they're taking a payload space on Lunar Outposts rover going to the moon. We invested in Lunar Outpost. Shout out to Lunar Outpost. And they're tokenizing that, so you can buy the tokenized space on the rover. Now, do I think there's practical applications in the short term? Not so much.
Yeah.
Do I think it'll be in the long term? You'll see, Web3 blockchain crossover into like space tech, and when you're on Mars, and how's the money on Mars going to be? People say, it won't be a central bank of Mars. It will be blockchain. Uh,
Hmm.
and so time will tell. There's bits of crossover, but not too much. It's not mission critical to have any Web3 type of businesses around space. You have like Mars DAO and a few other interesting things that are popping up, but I don't know. I don't know if it's in the short term there's a really interesting investment thesis there. But maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And just out of curiosity, like last thing we'll finish up on is like, what do you think some of these exits are for the space industry? Because it seems like it's going to take a while for people to, get the revenue going and like, to be publicly traded, right? Like you're based on fundamentals, but like, anything could happen up in space. And obviously, SpaceX, which we're investors in, is, one of the most like valuable private companies out there, right? But then there's Starlink, part of SpaceX. Like, what do you think some of the ways of helping investors monetize are going to be down the road?
Yeah, very, very, very good question. We hear this a lot, and because it's space, it's perceived as a long time horizon. There are some companies that are, but it's like any other business. The biggest indicator, and it'll come down to SpaceX, in my opinion. The cost of launch of a Starship will be, he's aiming to have it at sub $10 million once it's fully reusable. That opens up business models that are currently not you're not able to put together. We're talking space tourism opens up. So a lot of these companies are actually generating lots of revenue and have sustainable business models. But companies like, for example, Orbit Fab, the whole industry will grow together, and there will be a tipping point where a lot of these companies will be profitable. And if you're not building them now, it's going to be very hard to break in at that time. So to answer your question, I do expect to see in the next upswing after this downturn or so-called downturn, um, see a lot of exits, a lot of SPACs, a lot of IPOs of these companies.
Mm.
And because that'll
Hmm.
align perfectly with Starship coming online, driving the cost of launch per kilo down further, and the explosion will be there. There's already the demand, and you see that with the private demand of SpaceX. SpaceX, I think, is will be the most valuable company on Earth in the next 10 years. Um,
Hmm.
and so the demand is already there. It's just the companies have to meet that demand, and the industry has to
Yeah.
meet that demand, and it all depends on launch. Getting that launch cost down is the most critical component of this whole industry succeeding. So if you believe in SpaceX, you should believe in Type.
Hmm. Yeah. Absolutely great. Well, thank you so much for being here, Tarek. I mean, if anyone wants to connect with you, how should they do that? Or where can they find you?
They can send me mail through the mail. I'm kidding. They could go to Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn. Just at Tarek Waked, TarekWaked. So yeah, thanks for having me, John.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for joining me again today, Tarek. And we'll see everyone in the next episode.